Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And this week we're looking at 84% expect growth, only 47% will hire. Why that should terrify most recruitment owners. And as usual, if you're watching on YouTube or other social platforms, please subscribe to the channel. It'd be much appreciated. So let's kick off with some stats that will help us understand that. So I said the webinar's title is 84% of growth and only 40%, 47% will hire. Why should that terrify people? So 84% of recruitment leaders expect growth in 2026, but only 47% of companies are planning to hire. So is the maths broken? And this came out of Bullhorn's primary data that showed 56% of firms reported revenue growth in 2025, which was up by 40% from the year before, and 45% expect the economy to improve, which was down from 73% the year before that. So there's obviously a bit of a change in that that's going on. The UK recruitment industry has also contracted by 3% to 25 billion in 2025, the first decline since the pandemic. So the pie shrinking, but growth is expected. So if you think about what the REC said, that they said in their industry status report 24-25, that confirmed the same direction for the wider GVA level, where the industry direct GVA fell to 40.6 billion in 2024, which is a 5.5% decline. But in nominal terms, that's a 9.2% real term drop. So it's starting to drop as the marketplace. And UK employers, they're not catching up either. So the KPMG and REC report on jobs shows the UK placement, permanent placement, falling month on month over the last 2 years. And even as the rate declines, and it's finally easing at the moment, employers remain cautious about committing to new roles. Only 47%, half of the gap, is not forecasted. So this is like living proof that the 47% of the gap, permanent places have been falling for 2 years. Even as the recovery shows a tentative sign, employers are cautious about that. So we've got to start to think about what we do from that. The other side of that is inside recruitment agencies. The talent picture has started to be sort of exposed. The UK industry runs a 43% turnover rate. The UK average is 15%. So we're 3 times higher. That means your top biller is not a trend, it's a structural condition of the industry. This top biller flight mode happens in these micro markets, and the recruitment has always lost staff faster than any other industry. And if you start thinking about the stabilisation market, think about what's happening in Q1. The PE-backed competitors are actively lifting senior talent and businesses from the marketplace. So that 43% becomes a strategy risk, not a cost on your HR line. And the final one that came up that I thought was really interesting was cash is following the pressure. 35% of UK firms experienced bad debt in the past year. On average, across the whole of the UK, that's at 29%. So recruitment is being squeezed harder than most. And the agencies that have not sort of redesigned their commercial model or not running a tighter cash ship, they're the ones that are probably in trouble and probably going to be in trouble for the rest of this year. So the questions for the next 45 minutes is basically based out in the title. 84% expect growth, 47% will hire. What's the danger for recruitment agencies in that way? Dave's back from his travels from last week, and he's jubilant after last night's Arsenal win. So he's happy away.
Of
So
course.
let's jump into that first question, Dave. You coach recruitment agencies. You see inside their P&Ls and you see inside their thinking. From where you're sitting, is the great stabilisation real, or is it a media story? And if it's real, when did you start to see it land in your clients' businesses?
I think it's interesting how because you put it in your in the Brutal Truth newsletter that goes out from Jump every month or so, and I think you put it in there that you're talking to many leaders who are cautiously optimistic. They're trying to decide, have we reached the bottom? Are we near the bottom? Do we keep things stable? Do we grow? Do we invest? And that is the most common question I get asked. I put it another way, do I stick or twist? And it's just the not knowing. This stabilization question is around the not knowing what's the wisest thing to do. Because we've got the bigger macroeconomic picture, we've got the political picture, we've got Trump, we've got elections, we've got everything going on. And actually, recruitment owners are just saying, I just want to run my business, I just want to do the right thing. And I want to do the right thing for the next 3 years, but I can't see the next 3 months. And then that's that stabilization question of, well, what do I do? And I think you've just got to look at the team that you've got and ask yourself, are these the people who are going to get me through the next 3 months, 6 months, should we say the rest of 2026, and decide on the strategy that you're going to take. And we're going to come on to that as we look at the rest, at the rest of the webinar. But I think I am absolutely seeing the question that was being asked at the beginning of the year towards the end of last year: do I stick or twist? Do I keep things stable? Do I invest? Whatever those questions look like, they're still being asked 5 months into the year, with, in many cases, no greater clarity as to what's going to happen in terms of all these things that go on in our market, politically and economically. So we'll unroll that as we get on to the webinar.
I think that's that comment then with no greater clarity. So I think, is it real? Is it coming? It's actually here. And I think Q1 in 2026, the quarter where most clients felt it, not in their headlines, not in their bank account, not in their sales, but they felt it in their profit because they start to see that. So it's not increasing in line with the sales for a lot of agencies. So great stabilization is not a slowdown. It's the gap between the revenue ambition and the headcount appetite. And if 84 expect to grow, 84% of the recruitment agents expect to grow, but only 40% are willing to hire, there's a gap in the recruitment agencies, and that's the problem that they've got to solve. And I think it summed it up last week when I was looking at stats last week for last week's webinar, and I put it in the brutal truth as it happens, which was the Page case study, Michael Page, the
Yeah,
Page Group
yeah, yeah.
study. They added 26 net fee earners in Q1. Gross profit went down by 4.9%, and in the UK, gross profit fell by 11.4%. Their productivity per head actually edged up by 2%, but the top line didn't follow that because adding people to the market, that is, as they said last week, less bad. And that's how the REC described the market. It's less bad, okay, doesn't give you fee growth. It gives you the same fee spread across a bigger base. And their CFO, Calvin Stagg, said, when he put it into plain English on an earnings call, apparently, that the conversation of offers to placement remains the most significant challenge. Translation means that deals are falling over at the last hurdle, and simple pipeline noise is creating less revenue. And so if people like Page, with the infrastructure they've got and all the things that sit behind them, are going backwards on a GP front, what think we're going to happen to a 30-man agency, a 5-man agency, if they start to hire people? So I think, you mentioned about business plans, about being your 3-year business plan. Is it now 3 months? I think if you've not reviewed your business plan, if you went back and looked at your business plan that you were working on last year, is it wrong? Or is it partly wrong? Is it structurally wrong? I think if you read it again and you sort of spend a month trying to execute it, we'll start to look at, does it cover AI? Does it cover retention? Does it recover margin development? Does it cover client offering? Because if it doesn't, it should, because that's what the ugly truth is, that some agencies in this audience right now will not be here in 18 months in their current state because of what they're doing today. And that's what we're seeing. Those that have disappeared already is because what they didn't do 18 months ago. And I think that's the real bit about stabilization. We've got to stabilize your business now. Otherwise, I think we've got big problems coming down the line from there. So let's move that question then as we move on. For 25 years, the recruitment story has been the same. Hire more billers, do more activity, and billing goes up. But when we sit with an owner who's just realized that formula is broken, what's going through their heads? And what's the first conversation that you have with them when they suddenly realize that adding heads doesn't always mean an increase in billing or an instant increase in billing?
But it's the same story in some respects. So we've used this stat before, haven't we? Have, but the average billing of an average recruiter across the sector 20 years ago was £96,000 a year. Taken
Yeah.
for if take taken inflation into account and the fact the salaries are better for 23-24, which was the last year that they had stats, LinkedIn worked out that the average was 96,500. So actually, with all of the tools and everything that we've got, performance still hasn't accelerated away. Of course, there are some that are £1 million billers. There are some businesses that have £500,000 billers. But average, you take those that join and stick around, it's about £100,000, 96 to £100,000. So adding more heads in an industry that has a 40% retention ratio, you add two, well, one of them is going to work out, or 1.6 of them are going to work out. The cost of acquiring those people is more. The salaries are a lot more. In some cases, there is a dearth of talent. The salaries, certainly I'm seeing it this year, salaries for new recruitment consultants have gone up, even in a more competitive market. So if you were paying 32,000 last year, you're paying 34, 35 now. But retention of staff hasn't gone up. So you pay more, and a lot of companies aren't keeping them. So I always use this phrase, or always have, but I'm not. I question myself now, Had, whether it's the right one. The biggest cost to recruiters is an empty desk, because if there's a desk there that you're paying for and nobody's sitting in it, but therefore you've got to get more out of the people you've got. But it comes back to that bit. If all you are doing is beating the people you've got on your sales floor to try to get them to do more, then you've got to look at your sales strategy. You've got to look at your culture. You've got to look at your purpose. All of that's got to come into play, because there are other challenges now. But there are also some significant other tools that can help to drive performance, to give back time to consultants. And if that time is used to develop relationships, then you've got a chance of making it work, even in a market which, should we say, is challenging for most.
So if you think about that market that's challenging for most, and do you have to work harder? And that stat there, that 96K stat is, one that we roll out quite a lot. So I
Yeah,
think now, if you look at most recruitment agencies, if you just open their P&L, and we do this quite a lot, open the P&L, look at the revenue per head for the last 3 years. Doesn't matter whether you're a solo business or whether you're a multinational. Look at the revenue per head of the last 3 years. Is it flat or is it down? Because what that head count is telling you, that if it's flat or down, its head count is not your growth lever. And the proof is on the page. When you look at it, data doesn't lie. So the questions we need to be answering is, how do we grow that figure without growing our headcount? And what you're talking about, the same. Last week we discussed it, that the hardest moment is when the owners realise that they're paying a senior salary for a job that half of that job, or 3/4 of that job, is now done by AI, while their top biller is still billing the same amount of money, and yet they've now got more time to actually grow the GP line. So what are we doing? So this is not a strategy question. This is about process. So it's about what we're doing when we create a better process that creates time. What are we involving that? And again, we talked about last week about the team shape, and we talked about, 3 layers, not 5. Should we just have a senior advisor, an AI agent, and then a low-cost operating model that helps us do that? Most owners have built a 5-layer business because that's what they've always known.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but
yeah.
now we look at the cost of that model. That cost is really expensive, and should it be making all the owners stop, think, and breathe because the team didn't choose the structure? We as owners chose the structure. Therefore, if it's broken, it's not their fault. It's our fault, our job to fix it. So I think that one financial truth is, the conversation gets practical fast. What hires do you make? What hires do you stop? What roles do you redesign? And none of it's comfortable, but I think all of it's necessary to get us through to where we need to be. And I think that's the biggest change, that a lot of people aren't going to change their operating model, aren't going to change how they work, etc. And yet, in before, could get away with that for quite a long time. I think now with the speed, the way that things are moving, you can't get away with that for very long because of the way that you can build a process that would mean that your consultants have more time at the coalface rather than in the background. So I think there's a big change coming. So let's move the question then, Dave, to AI. Okay. Um, I talk about micro shifts, and there's four micro shifts happening. There's the AI agency, there's margin compression, there's the top biller flight that is actually happening, and there's client cost awareness. So out of those four, which one do you see hitting recruitment owners the hardest at the moment? And which do you think most owners are still underestimating?
The one that's hitting hardest the most, and it's the same one, is the clients our clients are underestimating, is client cost awareness. Clients expect a lot more from their suppliers, whether they're recruitment suppliers or any other supplier. They just expect a lot more. And their understanding of the costs of us running our business is minimal. And in some cases, they don't care. They just want you to find the best people faster. And some of that is down to us as business leaders not communicating the value of what we do and just focusing on the cost. If you are still in 2026 having margin driven conversations with your clients, you need to change your approach. You need to communicate the value that we bring and what that value looks like to the clients. Because most clients are intelligent enough to know that if you could present them with a strategy, with a roadmap of what you're doing, even with your own roadmap of what you're doing using AI, for example, um, to retain your staff, to build success into your business, that answers the other three points. Clients will understand that. Your clients want value. Can instead of placing just one or two people, can I have a conversation with you about helping you actually run your recruitment? Can I have a conversation as one of my clients was doing 2 weeks ago? How can I upskill your existing staff so you don't need to buy as much from me? And you can look at that and go, well, that's ridiculous. We just want to keep placing as many people as we can. But my word, what an intelligent way to approach it, because you're still going to get the business, but you may get all of it rather than be one of five suppliers because you're talking about maybe training their existing staff. Now, they may not want that. They may have outsourced that to another provider. You may not have the skills to do that if it's, say, a financial thing that you don't do. But just having the conversation binds you closer to the client and shows that you're aware of their costs and what's going on in their business, and it makes them aware of what's happening in your business. So I think client cost awareness for me is number one.
You know what? I wrote the question, and as always, and I've read all the questions, send them out to you on a Monday or a Tuesday, and then I usually make a little bit of bullet point notes of how I'm going to answer that question.
Now you're going to change the question.
No, 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 no. Well, I am going to change the answer to the question. I am going to change the answer to the question. Okay, because I think all four actually hit at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the bit that business owners miss. So AI is not about a separate problem from margin compression. If you look at AI cuts cost, which means your competitors, if they're using AI, can charge less to a certain degree, which means your fees are going to get challenged, which means your margin compression. So they're all actually linked. And I think the most underestimated to me is, as you said, is client costs by a long way. You know, owners and recruiters think AI is a big threat to them and their roles when it's not. The
No.
biggest threat is sat in your client procurement team because they're sat there with a spreadsheet asking why they're paying 20% to a recruiter when an internal TA team could do that and with AI at 70% of the cost of it. You know, that's the threat, that our clients can use AI to do that. You then start to think about that top biller flight. I think that's one that ends the businesses the fastest, especially small businesses. AI will take probably 24 months to probably embed properly and work and start to see the real financial gains, because that's the benefit rule of a business. Margin compression normally takes 18 months for it to start to hit hard and see what it does. You take a top biller, they walk down that corridor in your office with that letter in your hand. You know that it's coming and that's them walking out that afternoon. That hits absolutely instantly. And I think that's the bit that most people sort of worry about. They'll never leave, but we've got to think about that's a massive problem in this type of marketplace. And I was with the leadership team last week, and we listed the 4 macros, and I asked them to put them on a piece of paper and score them, which is quite interesting. The one that scared them the most is probably not the one that they should be focusing on. It's the one that bores you the most, and the one that they kept saying, "We'll do this next quarter. We'll do this next quarter." And that's the one that, when we actually went into it, was the one that was already eating their business. It was enlightening that the ones that they were trying to get away with and say, "Oh, that don't worry about that," it's the ones that they're probably calling their business the most. And I think because the agencies that are winning in 2026 are not the ones that are beating one of those shifts. They're the ones that are building a business that's robust enough to cover all 4 of those, whether it's margin erosion, whether it's AI, whether it's your staff, leaving and looking at your staff leaving, or whether it's the cost awareness of your client, you are challenging those. And so I don't think we've got this micro shift problem. I think we've got a structural shift problem, because the response has to be structural. It has to be how your business works. So it's not 4 separate projects. I think it's one big redesign project of your business, looking after all 4 of those sort of areas. I think that's what will make a huge difference. And that's the bit. If I was leading a recruitment agency at the moment, whether I was leading a solo business and being a solo recruiter, or whether I was leading a big multinational, I'd be still concentrating on those 4 things.
Yeah.
I wrote this question after a lot of thought, after digging into a lot, digging into a lot of stats. Okay. I looked at recruitment over a long period of time. Yeah, okay, that 1 million, 3 million, and £5 million revenue ceiling always seemed to exist in recruitment. Getting it past £1 million, gross profit or turnover, getting after 3, getting after 5. Okay. What's the difference about hitting one of those ceilings in 2026 compared to 2022? And what's the trap you see owners walking into as they go through that process?
It probably costs you more to hit the same number in 2026 than it did in 2022 for 2 reasons. Things clearly are more expensive. Everything out there is more expensive. And some of the tools that agency leaders have bought, because they're attractive, they haven't implemented properly. So they've ended up with more per desk cost. Salaries have gone up. Comp plans haven't changed for similar performance. People are earning more money. So to hit that revenue ceiling is more costly. Philip Ellis, who runs Optima, one of our partners, has always used this phrase that a pound of profit is not the same as a pound of value. And it's such a good phrase to look at when you're trying to drive for a target. It shouldn't really be a revenue target. You should be looking at your profit and how does that equate into value? Are you into niche? Are you running a business that is ultimately more valuable using the people that you've got, using the tools that you've got? Are you making the most of AI? Are you making the most of your market position? Are you training and leading your people well? When I used that phrase earlier on of some leaders are just trying to get more out of the people they've got so they don't have to spend as much, which makes perfect sense, but then aren't training them for the new world of work. They're not training them to have conversations with clients about cost awareness, about margin compression, about what's going on in the market, about business intelligence. They're not invested in the training, but they are investing in the whipping, and it doesn't work. And we've seen just from the stats that you showed at the first part, it just doesn't work. You've got to, as a leader, you've kind of got to get the best of both worlds. You've got to encourage and cajole and train and coach your people to perform better, but they've got to perform better more intelligently so that they enjoy what they're doing and that they stick around. Because if you whip them and then they leave, you haven't got anything, you haven't got anything to show for it. So it's getting that balance right, but also focusing on 2 or 3 things that absolutely matter. And I would suggest that revenue isn't one of those things, but revenue, but profit per head would be, creating a more valuable business would be, having better staff retention would be, closing the offer to acceptance ratio. Those sort of things are the things that are going to make a difference.
So it's interesting. I sort of looked at this question and started to think about back in my own career, especially running my own business, when I thought the ceiling was about people and process. If you had the right people in the right process, then it would grow. But I think it's now about people, process, AI, fees, team shape, and all of those things are hitting at once. And I think that problem is, you know, we're used to handling two of those issues, people and process, but the rest are now all sort of driving into that. And I looked at that sort of £1 million ceiling. I thought a team of five normally takes around about 18 months to
Yeah,
get to £1 million
yeah,
GP or £1 million turnover and break through that. Owners are now seeing that taking 3 years. And that's not AI has eaten the bandwidth, because I think the AI conversation has eaten a lot of the bandwidth of what our people are doing. And I think what we've stopped doing, though, is meaningful business development, because we think the machines will do it for us. And that's part of a process problem, but not the whole of it. You then look at that £3 million ceiling, and I look at a lot of companies that get to that £3 million, and the owner discovers that if they have one flat year, the P&L can't survive, because the cost base, if you rightly said, has grown, and that becomes an anchor that actually sinks them and pauses growth. And then you look at the £5 million, that's changed completely. It's no longer a leadership problem. I think it's a business model problem. £5 million agencies are built on contingency placement fees and contract placement for
yeah.
contingency business. That's the biggest exposed market in the world at the moment, because people are moving to more retained models and different types of models. So if you think where your business is now, whether it's at 1 million, 3, 5 million, the real question is, what got me here will not get me out.
No, that's right.
And most owners can't answer that, because they only know what they know, and it's what they don't know that will actually become their biggest anchor. And I think nobody sort of tells you about the ceilings, and it doesn't get easier to generate revenue. It gets harder the bigger the business gets, because your revenue is spread across so many different things. So I think the old playbook of a business that was 4 years from 4 years ago is the problem, because we've got the muscle memory from doing it that way and doing it the same way over and over. And therefore, breaking that muscle memory, breaking those habits, unlearning them, that's what starts to create growth. And I think we get too comfortable, and we learn to survive rather than learn to thrive. And when we learn to survive, we just tailor and tinker a little bit with our processes. When we actually learn to thrive, we
Yeah.
completely change them and address them in that way. So I think there's a lot that we can do in that fashion, because it gets harder the bigger the business gets. And that doesn't make any difference whether you're a solo business or a massive business. You know, it gets harder the more you start to build. If we move that, then most owners, and I'm going to use one of the four key areas that we looked at, which was top billers. Most owners try and retain their top billers with money. What we're saying is that that doesn't work anymore in 2026, from what I'm hearing. You know, from your coaching practice, what actually keeps a top biller in their chair, and what is the ownership or trajectory conversation that most owners are having or avoiding with their top billers?
Yeah, I mean, without being too flippant, Howard, money still talks. So if you can pay them more money, whether you can afford to or not, often that does work. But that can speak to, in some cases, a lack of other things, which if they were right, you wouldn't have so much of a focus on money. So, for example, culture. You know, culture is a key thing. What's the culture of the organisation like? What's the leadership like? Are they praised? Is there a generosity of praise for what they're doing? Are they being asked to pass on their skills to other people so that they themselves are growing? Um, is the opportunity to earn more? Are you investing in tools and training so that your top billers and others, of course, can earn more by placing more people? You know, are you getting hold of the right candidates faster than your competitors so that you can place them so that your top billers are still thriving? It's it's understanding. Do you as a leader understand what your top biller wants for her growth or his growth? You know, if you understand all of those things when you're having those conversations, then of course, if they're still earning money, they're more likely to stay. But there was a business that I used to run that I'm not involved in anymore. But they had a very, very top biller that the company that bought it thought this person is never going to leave. They earn an enormous amount of money. Nobody will pay them that sort of money, and they did, and they put in a guarantee for 6 months, and that person left, had a huge hit on that business that they bought, and the new business that acquired this person. Yes, for a year it was hard, but 2 years on, this person's doing a fantastic job, earning good money, and the company is also earning good money. So nobody is safe. So are you looking after them with praise? Do you have a good culture? Are you understanding their development? How do they fit within your strategy? All of those things are what helps top billers stay.
It's an interesting conversation. I'll go through my own sort of experience when I was getting headhunted a lot as a biller, as a £750,000 biller, you know, and to me, it wasn't about the money, it was about the trajectory.
That's a lot of money in those days, H.
Yeah. But it was about the trajectory. And so, a 250, 300K biller doesn't leave for an extra 10K on their
Yeah,
pay packet.
no,
They leave because somewhere else can see what their next 3 year looks like and is showing them what it will look like. And so I think sometimes we as leaders tend not to sit down and have a proper conversation with our top billers and actually ask them, what do you think your next 3 year looks like here? What would you change? You know, not is everything okay, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we have that conversation. And I think if we're honest, it's the conversation that owners don't want to really have. And I'm not sure that equity and shares actually truly attract top billers anymore, unless the stakes big enough and that there's a potential event on the horizon, because that just locks you in with shares. It doesn't really give you anything else. But if you start to think about profit share, partnership, a place on the board, a defined, credible career path, as you were talking, teaching, coaching, and mentoring other people, you know, and not moving the goalposts, that is what starts to attract people. It's not we're a family business, we have a great culture, you know, it's about ownership of their future. And I think sometimes we don't take ownership of their future. They take ownership. And I think as leaders, we've got to take ownership. So as a top biller who's not had that conversation, if you've not had it in the last 12 months with your top biller, I'd be having that conversation right now with them after I leave this meeting, because you know the rec to recs are out there at the moment, and that's their biggest prize. They've moved on from, let's take the person that's been 6 to 18 months in a business and try get them an extra 10K somewhere, when I can get this guy a whole lot of cash more on what's going on. So I think the rec to recs are out there now really touting in this marketplace. So I think the conversation that we're avoiding is, how do we keep our big billers, because we have this comfort blanket that they're never going to leave, when actually they are.
they do.
And quite a lot of big billers are leaving at the moment, not to go anywhere else, but to start their own recruitment agency. And I
Yeah,
think sometimes you've got to admit to yourself that you can't keep them. And that honest conversation is having that knowledge of that most loyal top billers will only be loyal to you if you respect them. And that's your conversation about how you praise them, how you talk to them, etc., etc. So if they respect you, they'll probably have that conversation with you, what's going on, rather than just leaving you in the lurch. And so I think there's a lot of things to be said about top billers, but I don't think at the moment it's that much about money, in my view. I think it's about the career path and how that you can help them become more and more part of your business, rather than being just a cog that generates cash for you as an owner, which lots of top billers then get to that point and start to think, I'm earning you X amount of cash and I'm only getting this. It becomes a big, big sort of conflict problem. So here's a question then. You sit outside dozens of recruitment agencies. We talk to them on the there before we start to work with them a lot. From the outside view, what's the one thing that recruitment owners are systematically missing about the market in 2026? Not the obvious ones, the ones that they keep telling you is fine when it's clearly not.
And it's not quite a market question answer, but it is. And I used it 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it provoked lots of discussion. The key thing is that their leadership casts a bigger shadow than they can ever imagine. And it's about leadership in a turbulent market, in a crazy world in which we live in. And we've spoken a little bit about that earlier. As a leader, what you do, how you behave, the way you conduct yourself, the way you set the example, all the things that we know what is good about leaders, that the people that in our careers, we've enjoyed working the most for, whatever that is for you, amplify it with your staff because they're looking to you for direction. Where's the market going? What's happening? What are you telling me? How are you guiding me? How are you praising me? All of those things because your leadership casts such a big shadow. And if you think it casts a shadow, think bigger because it casts a much, much bigger shadow. And in a market where people are still moving, they get a glimpse of another style of leadership at an interview, or maybe they see something online or they read something in a blog and they think, well, that's quite interesting because my leader isn't doing any of that. So I think you have to just turn around and look at yourself in the mirror and say, am I doing all that I can do to be the best version of myself to help these people? And if not, work out what it is that you need and get some support and some guidance and some help for that.
It's interesting, isn't it? So I'm going to part the leadership on one side because I think that's absolutely right. Because I thought, it's a genuine leadership problem, but I also think that it's a speed problem. It's not
Okay.
about direction.
Okay.
It's not about strategy. It's not about vision. It's about speed. And if you think about what's going on now in the marketplace and how things are changing, okay, what used to take them 18 months to bill now might take them 6 months with a strategy change. If you invest in process development, invest in candidate pooling, invest in making the boat go faster,
Yes.
then it will start to work. And I think they're starting to miss that. So they're missing the fact that the market hasn't stopped waiting. In 2022, you could almost have a year off and then come back in 2023, you'd be fine. In 2026, I think a year's delay is a structural disadvantage that you may not recover from. And I think they're missing that comparison set. We compare ourselves against other recruitment agencies and other business owners. Why? I'm not too sure. But the benchmark should be comparing ourselves against our professional service. You know, how are we against other professional services? How are we against the law area? Because if you look at what they do, the professional services, etc., they never go out of fashion. They always grow.
No,
Then
no.
start thinking about the data we have. We start to think about consulting that we could do, advice that we could do to companies. You know, but those firms move on, and they change their clients, they change their approach every 24 months, but we don't in recruitment. Our approach is always the same. So the gap is now getting bigger because clients aren't buying the agency. My agency is better than your agency when you go and sell to a client. My agency is better than that, etc., etc. They're buying partnership, they're buying advisory, they're buying professional services at all levels. So if you think about that, and it was interesting talking to a client the other day that was going through a sale, and they were talking about what they're doing in the sale, and they talked about what the private equity person said when they walked in. They said, "What would you fix in the next 90 days?" And they couldn't answer that question. And so they're saying, well, you're missing what needs to be fixed then. So what we want to do is we want to come in and look at your business and we want to see what needs fixing in the next 90 days, because that's what we're going to approach first and foremost. So you think about what recruitment agencies are doing now, lots are standing still and watching from the sidelines. And most owners think that that's a reasonably safe option. In 2026, doing nothing is going to be a big problem. The standing
Right.
still agencies are the ones that will disappear first. So the guy that sort of the recruitment agent that believes that their clients will never stop working with them, their big biggers will never leave, AI is nonsense, and happy to use their old antiquated processes. I think they're the ones that when we start to look at you know what they're missing, that's what they're missing. And the final one is about what you were talking about earlier on, is about the people inside the business. You
Yeah.
know, the team won't tell you that the team is in the wrong shape. Your big biller won't tell you if the business model is broken. They'll just leave instead. And I've been speaking to lots of agency owners who aren't working with us, and that's what I'm hearing constantly. And I can't understand why this is happening. I can't understand why people leave. I can't understand why my clients have stopped working with me. Well, that's probably started to happen about 18 months, 2 years ago. And the time to address it has started to run out. But that's what happens in every financial downturn. If you sort of go through the financial downturns that we've had, if you address it really early, then you should never be bothered by the financial downturn. If you're doing the right things in process, you should never be bothered by that. But we've got to understand that the prevention is better than the cure, but we're still not putting the right prevention in, I don't think. I still would not changing the way we work to compete where we compete on our skill set, our knowledge, our advisory skill set. We're still competing about, I can beat that agency, that agency's rubbish here. We're still competing in that marketplace, which I think is old, antiquated, and doesn't work. So, final question. If a recruitment agency owner gave you 60 minutes, we give free 60 minutes to agency owners that we've never worked with before, of their time tomorrow, and walked away with one question on a notepad to sit with for the next 90 days, what is the question that you would write down for them?
My question would be, what is the one constraint that if you removed it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? What's the one constraint that if you removed it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? Why? Because most businesses have a single binding constraint, and that could be deal flow, that could be a capacity issue, it could be leadership bandwidth, it could be conversion of certain statistics. So I would encourage a leader, or I do encourage a leader to have a look at what's the one constraint that if you removed it would make everything easier or unnecessary.
Interesting. I think we're on the same lines here because I wrote down the question be what in your business will not exist in 24 months that exists today, and are you ready for that change?
Yeah, that's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I looked at I started to write sort of questions that I would sort of think about asking people, and they became what I class as very cold questions. So, which of my three top 10 consultants are doing a role that AI can do now for free? How do I redeploy their skills? Not lose the person, but how do I redeploy that person? And the second question, you know, my clients are paying me a premium fee, but if I went them and asked to work with them exclusively for 18 months, would they say yes? Because if they're not, then we haven't got a conversation. And then my third question
No.
was on there, what of my where's my next senior hire actually coming from? And then that just boldly, will my processes look the same in 12 months? Will they be faster, more efficient, easier, and a true differentiator? Or will my processes develop more time for my consultants to sell? And they were the things that I was looking at. And it's an interesting conversation to have. But that to me was, what will not exist in my business in 24 months' time was my answer to that question. We've got a question that's come in, Dave, before
But from Annette, I was just looking at that as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we are
I,
introducing. Sorry, Dave.
yeah, go on, go on.
I said, next put, we are introducing AI into our processes as much as we
Yeah,
can, where we see the benefits, but we have to accept that our clients are doing the same. The human element is now important than ever to have a differential and offering value over and above whatever else does. Two
yeah,
things: human and AI have to align to survive. And if you listen to last week's webinar, I'm not sure if you were on Annette or not. We talked about those two things coinciding, and I genuinely think that AI isn't there to replace the recruiter.
No,
AI
no.
is there to create more time for the recruiter, the more human things that recruiters should be doing. And I will still stand on this platform and say here and now that AI will never convert a sale as well as a human can convert a sale when a human to human is selling. And that is going to be the difference. AI to AI, yes, it will convert a sale, but I think AI to human sale is going to be nowhere near as strong as a human sale.
And we used to say that, didn't we, that if you write into Chat GPT, what can't Chat GPT give me in recruitment? And he used to come up with, and I haven't checked recently, but he used to come up with ethics, relationships, and culture. And they're three of the key things that humans bring that AI would struggle to bring. So there is absolutely a synergy between humans and AI, but the role that we play as human beings becomes ever more important as the role of AI comes into recruitment for our clients and for ourselves.
And she did watch it. Sorry, Annette, I didn't realize you'd been watching on YouTube, but much appreciated. If anyone else watches YouTube, please spread the word on YouTube from there. So I think that's a really interesting sort of place to finish. And next week's webinar again we're going down the same lines, this time. Next week we're looking at is the big stick broken and what should recruitment leaders actually be doing to generate more revenue, especially now as Gen Z is becoming a bigger part of the marketplace and how that works. And the week after that, we're going to look at quality candidates are harder to find, but we're still chasing jobs. So where's the real money at? So these are all interlinked and all interlinked in a certain way. So if you want to do that, feel free to come along, sign up for next week. We look forward to seeing you. Dave, thank you much for your time. Annette, thank
Thank
you
you,
much for your
everybody.
question.
Yeah.
And good luck. Have a good week. Catch you all
See you next
later.
week.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.